Hello and welcome back to another Veeam and Object First video. There's a saying out there that failing to plan is planning to fail. So one of the ways that Veeam has built into their software to help you avoid this scenario is SureBackup verification testing. Now, the SureBackup mechanism consists of several different moving pieces, such as the virtual lab, application groups, and the SureBackup job to basically activate all those different components. In this particular video, we're going to dive into all the settings that are available in the SureBackup job itself. In another video, we'll dive deeper into the back-end infrastructure and mechanisms that are required to activate this SureBackup verification testing, like we mentioned, application group and the virtual lab. So Jeff, let's start with this wizard on the SureBackup job creation and take a look at what settings we have available.
For certain. And I'll also remind everyone that this is absolutely critical, because just doing a backup and getting a successful result really in today's backup environment or threat environment isn't enough. So what Veeam is doing here is giving you, I would say, a relaxation pill, at least you're for a backup administrator, because SureBackups will tell you that they are sure. In other words, when you go to restore them, they will boot. Those VMs will boot, the applications will work. And so for your critical machines, you don't necessarily have to do this for all of them. This is a must. It means that you know that you have backups that work. So we're in the new SureBackup job wizard, and you'll see right away there's two verification modes. One's full recoverability testing, recommended, and I think I would underline that too. Backup verification and content scan only. So why have they put that there? Well, remember I said, it's not really essential to do this for all of your VMs. You might have developer servers or things of that nature, which aren't as important as your critical servers. For those, you could just run the backup verification and content scan only. That'll give you at least knowledge that the backup file is fine, and also it'll check for traces of malware. But for important VMs, the full recoverability is absolutely a must. This means that after or when this job runs, it's going to actually boot this in a segregated environment. So it's not going to bring up another, domain controller in your company environment and cause havoc and duplicate IPs and everything. No, it'll be separated. But it'll do different tests if you need to. And you can, by the way, create different tests for this, for your applications. And then it'll bring everything down and send you an email and log the fact that, yes, this worked. So for compliance, this is important too. You can prove that on such and such a date, this VM actually booted. So let's go to next. And by the way, do you have anything else to add about that, about these two different modes, Matt?
Yeah, Jeff, as far as that, I think it's straightforward. One of them actually turns them on and makes sure that they boot. The other one just does a health check, CRC, checksum, make sure that the data itself at rest is valid. Now, one of the things I wanted to add on here, and I know most of us at least can relate, how many times has Windows applied an update, but the server hasn't yet been restarted? If you back up that machine in that pre-restart phase, you don't even yet know if whatever update, whether it's a Windows update or even a software update that you leverage for your company, has caused issues yet because the machine hasn't been restarted. So this is one great use case of why SureBackup is so important, is it actually will start that VM with the changes that have already been applied to make sure that it does boot and respond properly, like you said, Jeff. And last thing I want to add here is, most of you probably have heard of the 3-2-1 rule. It's been around for decades now. And, with Veeam and Object First, we highly suggest the 3-2-1-1-0 rule. 3 copies of data, 2 different media sets or types, 1 being offsite, 1 being air-gapped or mutable. Where does the 0 come in here, Jeff? That is for 0 errors, and that's where SureBackup comes in. So SureBackup has been an integral part of the Veeam resilience story for years now, ever since the 3-2-1-1-0 rule was adopted. So this is a very important piece of your Veeam ecosystem to make sure that you fully understand and leverage to ensure that not only do you have those backups on absolute immutable storage with Object First, but leveraging Veeam, you've tested them. You know that there's no DNS issues, there's no hidden registry corruption waiting to wreak havoc when you need that backup to work. So this is a very important capability that Veeam has innovated.
Yeah, so let's move to next. And I'll also say, people often ask, well, wait a minute, I just have replication jobs. But remember, each job has a specific use case and also different, I would say, safety measures. If you get hit by ransomware, that is replicated over with a replication job. So that's a key difference of why you definitely have to keep backup jobs going and perhaps also replication jobs. But this you can test with backup copy jobs. If, by the way, if you're using VMware, they have SureReplica jobs, but I don't want to expand this too much. So let's go to next. Virtual labs. So basically, you have to create this segregated environment. This is purposely done so that you do not leverage anything in production. Matt, what can happen if you bring up another server in production, which is identical to one that already exists?
Yeah, I feel like most of us these days use static IPs. So if you bring up two machines with the same IP, you're going to have all kinds of communication problems. And it's never a good thing to bring up duplicate UUIDs in production. There's a lot of things that could go wrong. And like I said at the beginning, we're going to dive deeper in another video on all things virtual lab. So for purposes of this wizard, this is where you would select a pre-deployed virtual lab. So if we go ahead and choose that and hit next, Jeff, the next step is an application group. Now, what is an application group? Again, we're going to dive deeper in another video, but to summarize this allows you to create any necessary machines that need to be started first for any of your dependent machines to work properly. And one easy example here, if you can notice the VM that's in this application group, domain controller. Sometimes you need authentication, you need a global catalog, you need internal DNS for things to work. So the application group allows you to specify those first tier one, primary machines that need to be started before you do any of your tests to make sure the test completes successfully.
There's one thing I want to add here, and it's perhaps one of my most favorite features in Veeam, and that's this: keep application group running after job completes. What is that? That's a sandbox in my linguistics, I believe. And I love sandbox. I've loved sandboxes ever since I was a kid. So these are not just automatic jobs. You can actually keep these running and go in there. And what's brilliant about that is, as Matt said, with the Windows updates, you don't want to be sitting there waiting for a server to reboot, wondering what might happen. This gives you the ability to go in, not just with Windows updates, but other things you might be doing before doing it in your production to see what happens. Hey, if anything goes wrong, goes south really fast, very hard, you can just stop the SureBackup job and no one's the wiser and no one feels any pain. So that's one of my favorite. I'm certain, Matt, you've used that as well.
Absolutely, Jeff. And I wanted to add a couple things here before we go on. So the keep application group running after it completes will keep the VMs in the application group only running after the SureBackup job completes. So the other use case of the application group is not necessarily just the dependencies like domain controllers, but it's different use cases that you may want to test against or run patches against. Maybe you have a series of 3 machines that all have to work in concert together: domain controller, Exchange server, SQL server, and you want to try a patch on those. You can create an application group that has those machines only, spin that up in that isolated environment. And here's the key, Jeff. If people already have the luxury of having an entirely separate test dev environment, that's great, but there's also a challenge in keeping it up to date and identical to what is actually running in production. And many customers will use replication to keep that up to date. But what's nice about this is for the customers who don't have the luxury of test dev, this gives them that capability and it keeps it up to date with the latest updates that's actually happening in production. You can simply run a backup job and then start this isolated sandbox, run your patch to see how it goes. And if everything is great, deploy in production with confidence. So it's a great capability that's been in use for years, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I can't underline enough. I've been in situations where I tried to maintain 2 almost identical environments for testing. The problem is you get busy. If your company's successful, you stop having time to do the extra, and you cannot, it's basically running 2 jobs if you're trying to keep 2 environments going. This saves you all that time. And the beauty is, If you're a big organization, you don't even know what other people on your team, or if you're a big IT department, have changed. And so your test environment might be very different from the real environment, but this is the real environment, but in a sandbox. Okay, should we go to next?
Yes.
So next is linked jobs. Explain to us what those are.
Yeah, so after you have, and remember at the very beginning, we chose the method for this job type that will actually start the machines and test them, the recommended approach. That means you do have to select an application group that we saw on the previous screen if you need any of that authentication ready to go. Here is where you're actually choosing those dependent machines. Like, what are we now testing? Are we testing our web server to make sure that it responds properly? Well, it may need DNS to work properly, so that's where the application group comes in. So here with your linked jobs, you can go through and link a job and either let every machine that was included in that job go through the line, and you can see there at the bottom, you can choose how many concurrent machines to keep online or start up at once to avoid, resource hits. But if you don't leverage exclusions, it will start every single VM in this particular job. And that's where your exclusions comes in.
Yeah, and if you look at exclusions, it's often the case that you cannot beforehand plan everything. So you've got a reason why you planned a certain job with certain servers in it, but that might not be the same reason where you're doing SureBackup jobs, as Matt said. And so you don't want to bring up all the servers. There can be a lot of reasons. The beauty of it is, though, that you can exclude either by job or from backups themselves. So for here, for instance, we have a whole bunch of servers, and let's say we only want to test, this one. Well, then we can just press all the other ones, and you can use the control button, and then add, and you will see that all of these have been added to the exclusion. So none of these will be brought up. Okay, now we've got our exclusions, let's look at some more advanced job settings. And I wanted to point out right away, Matt, that you have down here, customize machine roles and startup options. And I think the critical thing to notice here is customize machine roles. And this kind of hints at individual machines or VMs.
Absolutely, Jeff. So if you click on customize machine and startup roles, this allows you to get one level more granular, because you'll notice to the right side of the job, you've got the add, edit, remove, and exclusions button there outside of this window. And those are going to be at the job level. So example, let's say you're doing a SureBackup verification test against a job that only has Windows domain controllers. Well, it's easier to come in here and hit edit. And let's say we want to do a test for a DNS server, global catalog, domain controller, or the authoritative recovery, and maybe, the global catalog, I think I've already mentioned. So you can choose those roles, and what Veeam is going to do is not only power up the domain controllers to make sure the servers boot properly, we're then going to do a heartbeat check. So if you're running VMware, that's going to be VMware tools, Hyper-V integration services, things like that, to ensure that the machine is responding with a heartbeat verification. Then we're going to take it a step further and do a network ping test, assuming you leave all this turned on and enabled, to make sure it's actually responding on the network. And then thirdly, as yet an additional verification check, you can identify key server roles that need to be checked to not only ensure did the machine start and it's responding, but is it working? And that's what you would do here to make sure certain ports are listening and responding, and certain services have started and are responding appropriately. And the difference here is when you specify it at this level, it's going to be the same settings, the same roles for every machine that was included in that particular job, which can be beneficial. Like, let's say you've got 4 DCs in a forest and you want to apply all the same settings, you would simply do it there. But Jeff, if we cancel out of this and we click on that link that you started on, this would allow you to get even more granular, go in and hit add and choose from backups and literally pick and choose which VMs you wanted to apply specific settings to. And this would be great if you had a job that had different servers, different roles. Maybe you've got Windows and Linux mixed together, which typically is not a best practice, but let's say you do. Another good example could be maybe some are on the domain and some are not on the domain. So in that case, you would need different credentials to authenticate. So this is where you can get one step more granular and apply those settings at the machine level.
And what I like about this is it is exact same menu options over here for the customized machine rules and startups options as it is for doing the edit on the entire job. So a great example of when you just need to do one server and then with one type of role, you specify it here. Now, it also is going to give you startup options, and this is critically important. And I would say this could be very useful, especially when we're dealing with different machines. Let's say you've got a job, one machine that really can run on 20% memory, because unless it's under load, which it won't be here. Let's say it's a type of database server which gets loaded up by a lot of connections coming in. Well, in your segregated SureBackup job, there'll be no connections coming in. So I could say, okay, well, I don't need to use so much memory for that. I will cut this down for that particular machine. Things like application initialization timeouts, very important, because let's say you are reducing allocated resources. Well, then your application might take longer. You don't want it to error out, so you can increase that time. There are other things too. For instance, let's say you've got a firewall enabled and you don't want to disable it for your test. You can disable the ping. Or if it's more important to know that it's running, you can disable the firewall. Now, Matt, we also have test scripts here. And this is particularly interesting as well, because people might think after we've said all this that you can only test those predefined applications, but that's not the case, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we try to make sure you can go as granular as you want to go when you're leveraging Veeam for these tests, right? And you could go in there and create a custom script, and it even gives you the pass or fail parameters that you can expect with your script. And if you go through there and you create all those, they can run during this SureBackup job all the way down to the unique VM level. And keep in mind, just like we've said, if it's a script that could be beneficial for all the VMs in the job, you could do the same thing up a level, at the job level, and it'll do the same script for all the machines in that job. So tons of granularity. And the whole point here is test your backups. That is the key, right? And it's not just testing that the job's completed, it's testing for true recoverability, making sure they work when they're called upon to work, and simply giving you all these different options for different ways you can test those workloads is absolutely critical, now more than ever.
Exactly. Again, a lot of companies have their own in-house applications. And so if you want to test those, your developers can develop their own tests, which can be run in this location. Okay, so we move on to the next screen.
Yep.
Now here are settings, different types of settings for another critical aspect of SureBackups. And this to make sure that your restored, recovered VMs do not contain bad things in them, i.e. malware or other things like that. And as you can see here, Veeam gives you a lot of options to scan your machines. So remember, you can scan your backup files, but this is also allowing you to scan machines that are running. Now, why might that be? Because certain malware will start to activate when a machine is booted, not just be present in backups. Also, remember, when you're scanning for malware, all sorts of things have to happen to actually catch it. And when there's new malware, there's a possibility it might not be caught by whatever scanning tools you've got. But when malware activates, behavior can change as well. And so this is an additional way to help catch them.
Absolutely. I think now more than ever, like we said, Jeff, more scanning and more checking is better, right? More is better. Certainly because you just never know with some of the AI enhanced malware and different ransomware threats that are coming these days. This, remember, is running off hours. Typically, this is running overnight, non-production hours, and it will be using minimal resources in this fenced off, isolated environment. So this is absolutely critical when you look at all the different ways that Veeam enables you as a customer to check your backups for not only recoverability, but are you recovering safe data?
Exactly. We also have here configure job notification settings. Again, critically important because you want to know, and there might be certain jobs which are extremely important, and you want to have extra notifications. I believe that if you've already configured global notifications, you will get notified about the end of the job, but that gives you that extra capability. And again, you can turn things off that you might not need. So it's giving you the choice.
And really, Jeff, to just kind of wrap things up and finish up this video, the schedule is quite straightforward. It's when do you want the job to run? You know, you can come in here and get specific with daily, monthly, you know, periodically, ever so often, or link the jobs together. And you can also wait for certain backup jobs to complete if the schedules were to have overlapped in some kind of way. But this is really your basic Veeam schedule that you're going to find throughout the Veeam wizards. And that's really the final step to creating this SureBackup job. Now, be sure to join us in additional videos where Jeff and I dive deeper into what is the virtual lab and how do you actually deploy it? What components actually keep things isolated in that segregated bubble that we're talking about doing all this testing in? And what are application groups and what are all the settings that you can tweak there? So until then, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys on the next video.